Kapil Kamiredi has a piece out in the Globe and Mail that basically underscores how Indians across political affiliations see Canada as the sanctuary of choice, quote unquote, for Sikh terrorists, also underlining the point that Khalistan is a dead and discredited issue here in India. We'll have excerpts of that column coming up on our screen in a moment from now. Kapil, thank you for your time. And I think the point that this column comes from you is so very important because actually you're not a fan of the Modi government. You have been a vociferous critic of the Modi government. You've also been a critic at different points of the Gandhi family. The reason I'm mentioning your political affiliation or your political positions at this point in your writings is only to make the point that you're not writing what you are in your column, which parts of which are on the screen, as a supporter or as a BJP voter. You are writing this as a proud Indian, as an enraged Indian, reflecting the sentiments, I would say, of most of us or a majority of us. What do you think Canada and large sections of the Western media are not understanding at this point?
Right. I think you and I are defenders or believers in pluralism, and it is staggering. Part of the reason I oppose Modi is because his ideology seeks to privilege one set of people against the other. And that is exactly what Khalistanis seek to do in a truncated part of India. So it's staggering to me that people who claim to oppose Modi abroad, who always use Hindu nationalist in front of his name, are astonishingly quiet and coy about what Khalistan actually means. Khalistan is a Sikh supremacist cause that seeks to erect a Procrustean state where non-Sikhs are non-entities, basically. And this was a cause that peaked in the 1980s, and you know the history of it. Thousands and thousands of people killed. It culminated in the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. But that is our tragedy. What I was trying to argue in a Canadian newspaper is I was never ever exonerating a crime. If India is indeed behind this crime, then the people who are behind this crime should be punished. I don't believe any nation should be assassinating the citizen of another country, or indeed of its own country. My argument really was, does Canada really want to be a country that becomes the sanctuary of choice for aspiring mass murderers? And indeed, it's home to people who've actually engaged in mass murder. Before 9/11, the worst atrocity in the skies was Air India flight in 1984, in which 329 people were killed. Nobody has been sent to prison for that. Nobody has actually suffered for that. And it's extraordinary that Canadian politicians, when they talk about that, when they talk about Canada, they never mention it. They have this, they suffer a kind of amnesia. And the point I was trying to make is that what Justin Trudeau is doing is inimical to India. It's offensive to India, but it is no less insulting or harmful to Canada in the long run. They are importing people who do not really pledge allegiance to Canada. They're never going to integrate as Canadian citizens. They're just invoking values which they actually reject. Right? They're speaking the correct words about multiculturalism, minority rights. You know, these are all slogans for them. What they want to do is enact terrorist acts on foreign soil in the hope of, as one of the characters here said, balkanize India.
Let's pick up Kanishka. If we look at the let me just mute you for a second while I ask my question. If we look at the Kanishka bombing, 329 dead and nearly 100 were children. A majority of them were Canadian citizens. They may have been of Indian origin, but they were actually citizens of Canada. Trudeau doesn't really care about them. No justice has been served. The perpetrators of this bombing were recently celebrated at a Gurudwara in Canada. This is the point that I think the Western media, the Western commentary that has cast this entire issue as some sort of morality play has entirely missed, Kapil.
Yes, what is extraordinary, Barkha, when you think about this, is that those people who died on the Air India flight were Canadian citizens, as you put it, but their lives didn't seem to matter. For a man who claims that the life of one Sikh militant who was killed, a man who hung out with terrorists in Pakistan, posed with AK-47, incited violence in a sermon against India, he deserved to be put on trial, not killed. I'm not advocating that. But his life seems to have driven Canada to madness, to the Canadian politicians, Canadian leadership. But the death of hundreds of Canadian citizens didn't matter at all. Is that because I do wonder, had they been white, would the Canadian establishment behaved as indifferently as it has done with that bombing. I sometimes wonder that.
You know, there's a question for you from one of our viewers, Saurabh. He says in his piece, Mr. Comrade states that Canada should come to reckon with its apathy, not towards, but I think he means on the Khalistan issue. But hasn't Canada, like France and UK, deemed these as immigrant issues to be put in silos? I think this is a really important question because for a lot of ignorant people in the West, Sikhs and Khalistanis are interchangeable entities, and nothing could be further from the truth. The very fact that even the US indictment documents on Gurpatwant Pannu, the Khalistani terrorist who was the lawyer for Nijjar, they cast him as a critic of the Modi government. They cast him as a Sikh leader. I just find it disgusting and shockingly ignorant because Sikhs are proud patriotic Indians. A Pew survey actually shows that 95% identified as proud Indians and 70% actually said that those who disrespect India cannot be called true Sikhs. And then you have Canada, America, the Western press calling Gurpatwant Pannu, Hardeep Singh Nijjar Sikh leaders. This conflation between Sikh and Khalistani in the West, Kapil, how do you react to that?
Well, it is more than anything else. It is offensive to Sikhs, right? Sikhs are overrepresented in all of India's institutions, and it's very patronizing for me to measure their patriotism. But I know that they are overwhelmingly in all the institutions of defense they are overrepresented, and that speaks for itself. And you just cited that Pew survey, which I actually included in the original draft of my piece, but we had to drop it for reasons of length. When you talk about this man, Pannu, after the attack on Israel on the 7th of October last year, he went on television and he said, we are going to emulate Hamas. This is a man who Western media has appointed as a spokesman, as the tribune of the oppressed Sikhs of India. And it's staggering to me, the ignorance in which this sort of commentary is fertilized. And I don't know how to dialogue with them, how to explain to them that, I abhor everything this government stands for. And an overwhelming majority of Sikhs, even the people who live in Canada, I think there are about 800,000 Sikhs who live in Canada, this tiny minority of Khalistan supporting Canadians are very well organized. They're extremely well organized. They raise finances and they have this ethnocratic dream, and they pursue that very vigorously. They go out on marches, they intimidate people, they attack India's consulates, they threaten Indian diplomats. But the thing is, the decent people just stay quiet. They just get on with their lives because they have things to do. They have, people to employ, taxes to pay. These people are idlers. They have nothing to give to society. And ultimately, I think they will end up being enemies of Canada. Canada will suffer in the long term. And when they do, I assure you, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when these people end up being, a thorn in the side of Canada, Canadians, there will be great commentary on how Canada has failed to integrate these people. I urge you, your listeners, your viewers, to read an article by Omar Aziz, who was a foreign policy advisor to Justin Trudeau. He published an op-ed last year in the Globe and Mail in which he laid out how he was Trudeau's advisor, and he laid out how Trudeau absolutely destroyed Canada's foreign policy, not only with India, but with Latin American, African countries, especially with India. He just wanted the votes of the Sikh community, and he admits that India repeatedly chased Trudeau, repeatedly sent him requests saying these are really serious red lines for us. And Trudeau refused to, just neglected them. And he says the foreign policy establishment of Canada refused to take that seriously.